I was born in October 1959 in Liverpool, to a Jamaican mother and an English father. My dad was a doctor, and we had a comfortable childhood. But everything changed in 1969, shortly after we all watched the Americans land on the moon. My mum told me Dad wouldn't be coming home. He'd been injured in a dock accident and passed away. Suddenly, our comfortable life vanished. Mum struggled with grief, drinking heavily, and my sister and I were left to fend for ourselves on the streets of Toxteth, or Toxie as locals called it. By my early teens, Liverpool's youth culture shifted from harmless pints and cigarettes to pills, ganja, and eventually heroin and cocaine. The streets became ruled by gangs, and after the 1981 Toxteth riots, much of South Liverpool was lawless and dangerous. No-go zones for police. Crime exploded, and if you wanted to survive or get ahead, you had to join a gang. By 1989, I was part of a crew moving drugs across England, Scotland, and Wales. We worked for a boss named Jabo, moving heroin, crack, MDMA, and weed. My partner Jimmy and I made £150 a day, huge money then, working 6 days a week. Jimmy was Jabo's cousin, a ruthless psychopath, and I was the good cop in our debt collections, keeping Jimmy from going too far. Things were steady until a rival gang's new leader ignored territory rules and started poaching Jabo's customers. Jabo sent Jimmy and me to warn them off, but when threats escalated, Jimmy violently attacked 2 dealers, smashing one's face with a motorbike tire. We expected retaliation. One night, rival gang members fired a shotgun through Jabo's living room window while his kids watched TV. Thankfully, the kids weren't seriously hurt, but Jabo and Jimmy were furious. We hunted the rival gang but found no trace. Worse, the dealer Jimmy attacked, whom we called Tireface, went rogue and began targeting Jabo's family. We had to find Tireface before he found us. Unfortunately, he found Jabo's sister. First, she was shot and hospitalized in critical condition. Jabo and Jimmy became bloodthirsty, desperate for revenge. Tireface had hidden himself and his family well, but eventually, he slipped up. One afternoon, Jimmy called me frantic, but oddly cheerful. We left Liverpool fast, driving to a cottage near Manchester. Jimmy knocked on the door wearing a balaclava and came out carrying a terrified little girl, no older than 5 or 6. He threw her into the back seat, and we drove to an abandoned farm near St. Helens, calling Jabo to say we had a hostage, Tireface's daughter. The plan was to lure Tireface out, but tragedy struck. The same day, Jabo's sister died from a hospital-acquired infection. That afternoon, the little girl we'd kidnapped went into cardiac arrest and passed away. Devastated, Jabo ordered Jimmy to kill Tireface's daughter, not just kill her, but decapitate her to send a message. The girl was tied up but calm, trusting our promise to feed her before returning her to her parents. Jimmy returned to the shed, but instead of food, he held a rusty hacksaw. He looked pale and shaky, slowly moving toward the girl to do the unthinkable. I had a gun on me and pulled it out, surprising Jimmy. He thought I'd put the girl out of her misery, but I wasn't going to let that happen. I pointed the gun at him. Jimmy was stunned. I told him to drop the saw and step away. He confessed Jabo had ordered the killing blood for blood. The girl had to die because Jabo's sister did. I repeated my order. Jimmy stepped closer. I took a step back and then told him to get on the floor. I revealed I was an undercover officer with Merseyside police, arresting him for kidnap and conspiracy to murder. Jimmy looked shocked, his mouth flapping like a fish out of water. His arm holding the saw dropped. I told him his only chance was to leave. He didn't refuse. After he left, I stayed with the girl until I found someone who let me use their phone. That day, I officially joined a different kind of gang, the police. I'd seen how drugs and gangs tore my community apart, and I wanted to help fix it. Years later, Tireface was convicted of attempted murder. During sentencing, his lawyer read a statement where Tireface personally thanked the undercover officer who saved his daughter not knowing it was me. That gratitude meant everything. Liverpool will always be home. I visit when I can, watch Liverpool play at Anfield, and meet old friends. But leaving was worth it if it meant saving an innocent little girl's life. In late August of 1996, when I was 19, I came home after a party feeling hungover. The house was unusually quiet. I found my mum sitting alone at the kitchen table with a glass of wine, which was strange for daytime. That silence brought a feeling of dread. She told me my dad was gone and wasn't coming back. He hadn't died, but had left without warning, no note, no explanation. The shock washed over me, mixed with relief that he wasn't dead, but confusion and disbelief. I asked my mum many questions, but she had no answers. She was upset trying to explain. For months afterward, no one spoke about his disappearance. Relatives checked on us, but avoided the subject. Whenever I tried to talk about my dad, my mum would cry or become angry, calling him a piece of crap and saying he was dead to her. Her silence deepened my curiosity, and I suspected she was hiding something. I decided to look for answers myself. I reached out to my dad's closest friend from college, Carl. He was shocked by the news and knew nothing about why my dad left. Carl suggested a few places my dad might have gone: Portland, his hometown Lincoln City, or Wrigley, a remote small town in northern Canada. Wrigley was the most isolated option. With a population of about 100, mostly First Nations people, one gas station, a medical clinic, and a distant RCMP office, it seemed like nowhere to hide. After driving 3 days from Portland, I arrived in Wrigley, prepared to sleep in my car since the nearest motel was over 100 miles away. At the gas station, I met Winston, who was friendly and curious about my visit. I showed him recent and older photos of my dad. He recognized a younger version of my dad in a picture with a woman in hiking gear, standing near Hunter's Rock, a local landmark about 10 miles from town. Winston said the woman resembled Susan Culver, who had gone missing near Great Bear Lake in the early 1970s. He advised me to visit the local government office in the medical clinic the next day. At the clinic, I met Chief Irwin of the Psaki First Nation. Although his title sounded grand, he described his role as mostly ceremonial. He was welcoming and offered to arrange a guide for me. However, when I told him I was looking for my dad and showed the photo, his demeanor changed. He revealed that Susan Culver had disappeared in 1973 and that my dad had been arrested and questioned twice as a suspect in her disappearance. Susan's remains were never found, and the case remained unsolved. Her last known location was near Great Bear Lake, where her abandoned campsite was discovered. Chief Irwin believed that if my dad was still in the area, he probably went straight to Great Bear Lake, avoiding Wrigley due to painful memories. Getting to Great Bear Lake required a 200-mile drive to Dellen, then a 30-mile hike through harsh marshlands, difficult without proper gear. Though exhausted and low on funds, I couldn't give up. After explaining my situation to my employer, I was granted more time off. Convincing my mum was harder. She initially refused to send money, but eventually relented after a tense phone call. Winston agreed to drive me to Dellen for gas money, but warned he wouldn't follow me into the marshes. Before leaving, he asked a chilling question about who would look for me if I went searching for my dad, while my dad was searching for Susan. His words haunted me. In Dellen, I met with Constable Jacobs and Senior Officer Mackenzie. Mackenzie remembered the case and my dad's questioning in the 70s. My dad had given a detailed first interview, describing a terrifying night when Susan disappeared. He claimed to have seen something frightening but refused to say what, fearing disbelief. The police became suspicious and made him a suspect. In a second interview, my dad stopped talking and was eventually released for lack of evidence. The search for Susan lasted 10 days, but found no trace of her or her belongings. Mackenzie also mentioned a police dog that disappeared during the search and was never found, triggering a separate search effort. He speculated that my dad and Susan might have stumbled upon something illegal, such as drug cultivation, but had no proof. Back in Wrigley that night, Mackenzie surprised me with a cassette tape, my dad's first interview. Hearing his young voice recount that night was surreal. He said Susan left the tent at night, screamed, and he rushed out to see what had happened, but wouldn't say what he saw. This explained much. Why my dad left suddenly, why my mom hated him, and why Susan's case remained a painful mystery. After 18 months of searching, I finally had something tangible to hold on to. I didn't know if I'd ever find my dad, or learn the whole truth, but I knew where to look now. I planned to return to Dellen the following summer, better prepared to search further. Writing it down helped keep me sane. When I found more, I would share it. I somehow made it to 28 years old, a father of one, without ever going on a camping trip. When my friend Caleb found out, he nearly lost it. Caleb was a Bass Pro Shop kind of guy into hunting and camping, with plenty of weekends spent in the woods with the National Guard. He said camping was the ultimate way to bond, and since we were near Buffalo, the Catskills were perfect, wild, but close. We packed light and drove up in his beat-up truck, finding a quiet spot a couple of miles from the trailhead. The clearing was surrounded by pines and maples, with a soft bed of pine needles and a nearby stream for water. Caleb set up both tents while I collected firewood, enjoying the chance to build a fire. By nightfall, the campfire was crackling, and Caleb made pudgy pies, peanut butter and marshmallow fluff toasted on bread. It sounded weird, but tasted amazing out there in the woods. The fire died down quickly, so I volunteered to gather more wood. The area near camp was picked clean, so I ventured deeper into the forest with my flashlight. As I stacked logs, I heard movement ahead. I froze, shining the light, but saw nothing. I called to Caleb, who joked there was always something out there in the woods. Back at camp, the fire roared again, and we cracked open some cold sodas, watching the flames. About 15 minutes later, we heard footsteps close by. Caleb shouted into the dark, warning whoever it was to move along. The steps retreated, but Caleb looked spooked. He said it wasn't an animal. It was a person, judging by the gait. He grabbed his pistol and suggested we check the area out. I didn't love the idea of walking into the woods at night with an armed man, but I understood. We found nothing and returned to camp, where Caleb made some Mexican pizzas. After a couple beers and a joint, we turned in for the night. Sleep didn't come easy. My sleeping pad felt thin, and the hard ground creaked beneath me. Every noise, twigs snapping, leaves rustling woke me. Caleb, meanwhile, was out cold. Then I heard it, a faint, high-pitched cry. At first I thought it was an animal or the wind. Then it came again, and again. It was unmistakable, a baby crying. I jumped up, put on my boots, and ran to Caleb's tent. He woke and listened, eyes wide. He reached for his gun. I said, "There's a kid out there, a gun won't help." Caleb shook his head. "That's no kid. Listen again." And when the cry came once more, I heard it too. Something was off. The sound was hollow, mechanical almost. Then a second cry echoed from the other side of the woods, the same sound, same pitch. We realized they were recordings. Caleb crawled out and called into the night, "All right, we get it, buddy. We'll move along in the morning." I hoped it would stop, but instead, more cries started. A third, then a fourth, all overlapping, echoing, surrounding us. "They're trying to scare us," Caleb shouted. "And if they're not, I got a gun." Then silence, the worst kind. We waited, heartbeats loud in the quiet, expecting something to happen. Caleb said we had to leave. The fire was dying, and I wanted to grab my flashlight, but he stopped me. Using light would give away our position. We packed in near darkness, taking turns watching for whoever was out there. We left without a word. Every shadow made my heart race. I imagined traps, ambushes, anything. Eventually, we reached the trailhead. Seeing Caleb's truck was a relief. Hands shaking, I climbed in, and he sped off. A few miles later, we pulled into a nearly empty diner and waited for dawn. Over breakfast, we whispered about what happened. Caleb thought someone was trying to scare us off so they could steal our gear. It made sense, but those recordings, who would do that? We drove back to the campsite in the morning. The place was trashed, food and beer gone, my tent stripped of poles, and Caleb's tent completely missing. It wasn't just theft, it was a message. We packed what was left and left the Catskills behind. I left my hometown years ago, thinking I'd never look back. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your face, your family, even your business. A place where nothing much happened, or at least nothing you were supposed to talk about. But sometimes, places like that hold on to secrets, dark ones, and they have a way of pulling you back in. It started with a call I wasn't expecting. From Mark, an old friend who never left the town and had a nose for trouble. He told me there'd been a break-in at the Jenkins house, that creepy old place at the edge of town everyone tried to avoid. No one had lived there for years, but lately, strange things had been happening. Lights flickering at night, noises that didn't belong, shadows moving just out of sight. I was curious, but cautious. When I got there, the house stood silent, almost daring us to come inside. The windows were cracked, the porch sagging, and the air smelled like forgotten years and decay. Mark and I stepped through the front door, and the creak echoed through the empty rooms. Dust hung thick in the air. Old newspapers scattered on the floor, and broken glass glittered like tiny stars. The place felt alive in a way, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. We moved cautiously through the rooms. That's when we found the back room, a place nobody spoke about. Behind a loose panel in the wall, there was a safe. It had been cracked open, and inside, instead of cash or jewelry, there were stacks of files, photographs, notes, maps, evidence that pointed to crimes no one had ever solved. Murders, disappearances, things the town had buried under polite silence and nervous glances. The more we looked, the more we realized this wasn't just some random break-in or teenage prank. Someone was trying to hide something, and the Jenkins house was the key. I remembered stories from childhood rumors about missing people, strange visitors in the dead of night, whispers that vanished when adults were near. I never paid them much mind back then, but now the pieces were fitting together like a puzzle I didn't want to solve. That night, after we left the house, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, and the empty streets felt less safe than they had when I was a kid. Mark was quiet, eyes darting, hands never far from his coat pocket. I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. We'd stirred something best left alone. Over the next few days we dug deeper. The files led us to names people who had vanished without a trace, their disappearances written off as accidents or runaways. But there was a pattern, a trail that led back to someone no one suspected. Someone with roots deep in the town's history. Someone with power, and a reason to keep things hidden. As we got closer, things started happening. Strange phone calls with silence on the other end. Unmarked cars parked too long outside Mark's place. A shadowy figure watching from a distance when I thought I was alone. It wasn't long before it became clear we weren't just uncovering old secrets. We were stepping into a dangerous game. One night, as I walked home, I felt it, the weight of eyes on my back, the crunch of footsteps just out of sight. I quickened my pace, heart pounding, until I reached my door and slammed it shut behind me. I thought about leaving again, running from a place that wanted to swallow me whole. But then I thought about the people who never got that chance, the ones whose stories were erased, the ones we owed the truth to. So I stayed, and I kept digging. It wasn't easy. There were threats, warnings thinly veiled and otherwise, but with Mark by my side, and a stubbornness I didn't know I had, we pushed forward. And in the end, the truth came out. Not all at once, not in a dramatic confession, but piece by piece, like the slow peeling of old paint to reveal the rotten wood beneath. We found out who was behind it, who'd use their influence to cover up crimes, manipulate witnesses, and silence anyone who got too close. The town had been sleeping with a monster in its midst, and no one wanted to admit it. But admitting it was the only way to move on. The Jenkins house was cleaned out, sealed up, and eventually sold. The files we uncovered went to the authorities, and some faces we recognized ended up under a different kind of scrutiny. I still visit sometimes, the way you visit a grave or a scar, to remind myself that silence can kill, and that some places hold more than just memories. Some places hold secrets waiting for someone brave enough to find them. I never thought I'd come back here. After all these years, this town feels smaller somehow, but the memories press in tight, heavy and unyielding. My father's health brought me home. That, and a restless need to face the past. I walk these streets slowly, letting the worn pavement guide me. The town hadn't changed much, but I had. Time and distance made everything sharper, clearer in ways I never expected. Eventually, I found myself standing in front of the school. The same old brick building, the same fading paint. But inside, the silence was different. It wasn't just empty hallways. It was the quiet that follows something terrible. We never really knew what happened all those years ago. The death during school days that left a scar none of us could explain. An accident, we were told. Something tragic, but nothing more. But it never felt right. I looked back with the eyes I have now. Eyes trained to see what's hidden beneath surface stories, and the pieces began to fit. I remembered hearing about strange trips to hardware stores, odd items purchased in secrecy, notebooks filled with strange drawings, plans no kid should have. The truth was darker than anyone dared say aloud. It wasn't just a death. It was an accident born from intent. He was building a bomb. A small, crude bomb, but deadly all the same. Intended for prom night, meant to kill everyone. The bomb detonated too soon. It killed only him. The town buried that truth, swallowed by fear and shame. We never spoke it aloud, but the weight of it lingered like a shadow on every school day that followed. Walking through those halls again, I felt his presence. A boy twisted by anger and desperation, driven to violence. I thought about how things might have been different, if someone had noticed, if someone had reached out. But that's a question with no answer. As I left the school behind and walked away into the evening light, I carried that truth with me. Some ghosts never leave, and some secrets are too dangerous to forget.